an alternative approach to, still to forest management in Clayoquot. And so, because of this, since that 1995 period when we started looking at building watershed plans for the region and a different focus, the two widely held values that have been driving efforts in the region are to provide that enduring protection of critical habitats and ecosystems, the environmental side of things, but to increase the benefits that are coming to the local communities from the resource extraction activities that happen. So in that time period as well, we've gone from large multinational corporations owning the timber tenures to both the tree farm licenses now being owned and operated by the 5 First Nations in Clayoquot Sound. So there's been a big change, and the forest management company set up to manage them, ESOP Forest Products, they practice and have been responsible for being probably the first triple bottom lined forestry management company on the coast since they were set up. In the photograph, you can see, in the pictures, you can see an aerial shot of some of the scenery in Clayoquot Sound, some of the small patch cuts that are happening, and then some of the products that are coming out of the forest, large cedar. Clayoquot Sound, as I'll talk in a little bit, has probably some of the best western red cedar available. And the bottom right picture shows some boards that have been cut in a houset actually on their own sawmill, and they're getting ready to reside one of their fisheries office actually there. So building a triple bottom line approach to forestry out there, we're trying to diversify a revenue stream that will help the communities recover from the loss of timber harvesting. Say going from 900,000 down to under 250 has had a big impact. At the same time, the tenures, we've heard today a little bit about tenures and legislation and restrictions, and currently forest management tenures in BC only allow the tenure holder to create revenue by timber harvesting. So that makes an awful lot of the forest unavailable for revenue creation by other methods. However, over the last 6 or 7 years, working with the nations and through the Clayoquot Forest Communities Program, we've been assessing what the real potential might be in regards to a more diverse business output that has resulted in our consideration not only of timber, but of ecosystem goods and services, non-timber forest products, and the potential for cultural or ecological tourism. And of these, carbon has appeared to be one of the better options for actually helping to make significant changes at scale. So coming back to the specific issue of these intact valleys, the echemus areas, how do we come up with a solution that can build bridges between conservation and the economy and the economic well-being of the communities? The potential for carbon offset sales seemed like it might provide a viable solution if there really was a market for carbon, and if carbon values matched or better yet beat the value of timber harvesting that it would replace. And so since early 2007, we've been working on this issue, and so at this point now, about 4 years later, we've got pretty much everyone at the table together agreeing that these are issues and problems that we want to solve through considering carbon opportunities. And so if we're talking about carbon, I think it's good just to make a few points about why the west coast of BC is a place to consider it. So the map I've got up here, I've used just to remind everyone who maybe isn't local that we're talking about probably the mildest and wettest ecosystems in British Columbia and probably Canada. The yellow areas you can see on the map there are what we call the coastal western hemlock, very wet hypermaritime, which is home to probably the highest rainfall records in BC, and typically in the region of 4 meters of rain a year. But just south of here, probably 50 miles south, is a place called Henderson Lake, which has recorded the wettest or highest amount of rainfall in BC with over 8 meters of rain in 1 year. So we're talking about a very mild climate and a very wet climate. And the result of that is very stable forests that are very long-lived. The average ages of trees in Clayoquot Sound is over 350 years, with many stands in the forest being over 500 years. And these stands can store and hold a lot of carbon, at least in the richer and more productive sites. Large wind throw or landslide events are very rare, and fire is extremely rare. So forest regeneration happens through small disturbances in the canopy as individual trees die and fall. And these factors make the forest very suitable for carbon storage and likely will lead to them being some of the best places to invest in forest carbon offset schemes. We've heard how already from Brad earlier today about the scheme in the Great Bear Rainforest of 30 million tons of carbon over its lifespan. Again, exactly the same reasons. Very old, very stable forests that can store carbon probably as safely as anywhere. Quite well buffered in the medium term from climate change issues as well. And so some of the early work that was done in Clayoquot, we began, as I say, researching the opportunities for carbon in early 2007. And right from the beginning, it was clear that skepticism and even mistrust of the motives behind the carbon concept, would mean that only the most rigorous methodologies and the highest standards would make inroads into this becoming a possibility or feasible. So on that basis, we contracted the services of one of the few organizations at the time with a track record in carbon and ecosystem goods and services to carry out an initial scoping exercise, which, although showing some promising opportunities, really created little interest. At the time, the communities were very focused on timber harvesting. They didn't feel that there was a great deal of benefit to be had from looking elsewhere. But at the same time, they did accept that if there was a potential to generate revenue while protecting the forest, it was something we should continue to investigate. And so that's what we've been doing over the intervening years. And so we call that creating a vision for the future. And through the Clayoquot Forest Communities Program, we've maintained that momentum. And through into 2008, when we finally put together enough funding to conduct a proper carbon analysis on one of the tree farm licenses, in this case it's Tree Farm License 57, the plan was to get the nations and the stakeholders to the table and draw out a range of different management scenarios that would satisfy each of the parties and allow us to consider if there was an optimum amount and location for managing carbon within the forest tenure. And so here on the screen you can see some of those alternative scenarios that we're considering to model, which is the business as usual case. So that's the legal mandate that ESOC, the Forest Management Company, has to manage the TFL. And then as an example of 3 alternative scenarios on the land, so additional watersheds. So we've got about 11 watersheds in the 11 watershed plans in the region. There's probably 17 or 20 watersheds in total. And what if we mixed up some of that from the current existing legislation? We protect some of those valleys, give them more protection, or what if we protected all of those watersheds from timber harvesting? Those are 2 alternatives. And finally, what if we redrew the map completely and said, okay, we'll have 70% or 60% protection across the land base, but let's redo the protection and the reserves from the beginning. That would be obviously a very much more complicated exercise, but something that might be necessary. And once we've decided what our models are or our scenarios that we'd like to model, it becomes a spatial GIS exercise to look at the impacts to the various land categories of removing additional land from the timber harvesting land base. So we'll, again, this will change the protected areas, change the timber harvesting land base. Following that, we then run a timber supply analysis based upon these additional removals, and finally carry out an economic assessment of the revenue implications from that reduced timber harvesting, and then consider the replacement revenue from forest carbon offsets. Finally, something that we're also considering in Clayoquot is conservation